Good morning. I'm Richard Stokes from Dublin City University from the Innovate Centre, which is the technology transfer and commercialisation gateway for the university. And although he's not billed here, my colleague Paddy O'Boyle, who's much more expert than I am, especially in the software arena, is going to join me to talk about some specific case studies to keep this conversation from getting too abstract. Just a few key facts about Dublin City University. Originally we were a National Institute for Higher Education formed over 30 years ago. Little over 10,000 students, an annual research expenditure of slightly more than 40 million euros. And I'm pleased to say that because of the team that we've got and the particular mix of expertise and the wider policies and strategies of the university, for the last 2 years DCU, Invent DCU has been the leading technology transfer office in the country, at least measured by licensing volume and licensing transactions. I'm sure my colleague from UCD here, Barry Smith, might want to challenge that. UCD and Nova have been at it for a lot longer than we have, but there's always a degree of healthy competition between us, although we collaborate to a huge extent. And just taking that point, this slide illustrates the breadth and the depth of collaboration that goes on, not just in DCU, but also with UCD, with NUIG, with Tyndall and Cork. There's a tremendously collaborative spirit now among the Irish universities, and this is driven by Science Foundation Ireland and in particular by Enterprise Ireland, who fund much of the applied research that takes the early stage research from blue skies concept to market. And without the support of Enterprise Ireland, both in the tech transfer offices and in the applied research funding, this kind of collaboration that we're now talking about with enthusiasm simply wouldn't be possible. So you can see there that we've got some tremendous names. Some of the biggest blue chip companies in the world collaborate, not just with DCU, but also with UCD, UCC and so forth. And there's a tremendous buzz about the universities. They're no longer ivory tower places where academics are free to do what they like, and they're inspired and challenged on a daily basis by the demands of industry. I think the talk that Sinead just gave illustrated very clearly the challenges that universities have to face in dealing with industry, IP ownership, confidentiality. But if they can be overcome, and they're best overcome up front by agreements negotiated at the start of a project, then a really productive, positive relationship can develop. And that's certainly been our experience, and it's DCU's policy, and specifically Invent's policy, at the start of any joint collaboration to define all of the key commercial terms in advance, so that there isn't a row at the end as to who owns what and who has the rights to exploit. This is just a short illustration of how research funding has grown at DCU, at least over the last 10 years. And frankly, it's been a revolution in terms both of funding and industrial engagement. And you can see that before 2000 there was lots of research going on, but it was isolated in many cases by really brilliant individual professors and academics who didn't have the resources and the scale to engage productively both among themselves and with industry. So I think DCU's success has been reflected also in the other institutions. It's clear that between them, Trinity and UCD account for almost 50% of the entire national expenditure in research and development, and we're approximately 7 or 8% of it. But everybody has benefited from this phenomenal government investment, and given the times that we live in, we all have a responsibility to A, be accountable for the money that's been spent, and B, to actually deliver some tangible results, not just to those wonderful multinationals who employ lots of people here, but to Irish industry, to Irish entrepreneurs who are either starting companies or trying to build companies who are currently suffering in this recession. The Invent Centre is a dedicated, purpose-built centre funded partly by Enterprise Ireland, mostly by DCU and partly by AIB. And in that centre, anybody who wants to start a company, whether they're from within the DCU community or externally, can come and locate and use the facilities and mix with researchers, academics and commercial people, and get the benefits and get the resources that are freely given by not just the DCU community, but by external experts and resident experts. So that's an environment. Nova UCD is a similar enterprise. They're a lot longer than we are, but we both provide similar services, and our aim is entirely to do business. We're all open for business, and we don't say that lightly because we take our responsibilities very seriously. In Invent, certainly, none of the team of people who are involved with commercialisation and industry relations are academics. That's not to diminish the importance of academics. The next speaker, Professor Barry Smith, is one of the leading commercially minded academics in the country, but it's important that you have people in your team who can speak the language of business, who've personally been through the experiences of startups or negotiating license, or indeed licensing technologies from a purely commercial perspective. So when I took over the Invent office in 2007, there wasn't a team in place, and it was my firm conviction that we would hire only people who had worked in industry. And by doing that, we could bridge the gap that sometimes exists between some of the more blue sky academics who are increasingly under pressure from Science Foundation Ireland and elsewhere to actually show relevance. And we can speak the language now of business, and hopefully we can translate some of their requirements into innovative concepts and approaches. There is a national mandate for all of the universities and the technology transfer offices in particular, and it's to manage the exploitation of the technology to get the best return for the Irish economy. It isn't about making money for universities. That's important because by making some money from transactions over time, we can help to oil the machinery to keep the system operating. But universities are ultimately not-for-profit entities. And that's a really important thing to understand. When we get into commercial negotiations, it isn't that we want to fleece somebody, destroy their profit margin, eradicate their potential for growth, but it is to ensure that there's some equilibrium in the commercial transaction that gives fair recognition for the value that's transacted, and that's all there's to it. Ultimately, technology transfer offices have two principal roles. They do many things and they cover many functions, but one is to capture and protect the intellectual property generated, not just solely by the university, but also the intellectual property generated. And this is where it's really important, jointly with industry, because where there's open innovation, where there's true collaboration, there's going to be joint IP. Sinead spoke about that. It can be challenging, particularly in large-scale multinational collaborations, but I think there's been enough learning in the Irish system in the last 4 or 5 years to be able to come up with a solution to any set of requirements that any company can put on the table. And of course then we're all obliged to provide incubator services, which we do. So if you've got an idea for a company, you can locate in any of the Irish universities now and you will get tremendous support. Ultimately, collaboration is about bringing the research that has been funded by the state into the economy in some tangible way, either through a license or through a startup company founded by an academic, and preferably founded by an academic in collaboration with a business person. Again, Barry Smith is going to speak as an exception to that rule. Many of the academics are tremendous at their research, but don't have sufficiently strong awareness of how to commercialise. And Barry is going to talk about how he has done it in UCD. There is a very important model in this country, which they're based on what's called the CSETs, the Centres for Science, Engineering and Technology. And traditionally, research in universities was done on a linear basis where there was a process of requirements specified, somebody did the assessment, eventually the technology was developed, somebody tried to market it and give some reality to it. That's not a very successful way of doing things. And the CSETs, the Centres for Science, Engineering and Technology, and the Clarity CSET, which is represented at the back, which is the joint venture with UCD and DCU, is one of them, are more about joint developments and developments which are inspired by the needs of society and industry. So we're moving from the model where the scientists were operating on an ad hoc basis and subsequently attempting to find business people to commercialise, to one where there is a matrix, a grid of interactions on a permanent basis between the companies, Science Foundation Ireland and the universities. We're attempting to constantly evaluate why we're doing something, what its relevance is, to cut programs where they're no longer relevant, because particularly in the world of software, things are moving so fast. The shelf life of products and ideas is astonishingly short, and we've got to constantly question strategy and iterate product development plans. So the Centre for Next Generation Localisation, the logo at the top, is one of the key research centres in DCU. It is again a multi-party collaborative research centre involving UCD, DCU, the University of Limerick and Trinity College, and that is involved with localising, it's involved with computer techniques for machine translation of languages from one language to another and all that goes with it. Ireland, many people don't realise this, is the biggest centre of software localisation in the world. And many of the technologies and techniques being used by the largest software companies are being developed in this country in a collaborative spirit between the universities. And the slide I used at the beginning showing all the logos had a lot of multinational slides on it. And you may well think, well, there's no room for smaller Irish companies. That's not the case. In fact, experience has shown us in the last 2 years in particular that many of the outputs from the CSETs actually are exploited by smaller companies using Enterprise Ireland funding, using Enterprise Ireland mechanisms such as innovation partnerships, innovation vouchers, and indeed other mechanisms from IRCSET, the Irish Research Council for Science, Engineering and Technology. And they really have opened our eyes to the fact that the very large companies can identify the challenges, but frequently they don't have the decision-making processes or the legal capacity to move very quickly to translate these opportunities into products or processes. And that they're best done by innovative companies moving swiftly and quickly in the market. And this is where there are huge opportunities for Irish companies to engage with universities, to engage with CSETs, to get introductions to blue chip companies that you might never get introductions to, and thereby to work and to network in a way that leads to phenomenal advantage. So moving on from here, again, I would summarise using the CNGL slide what we're about. Our vision is to deliver economic and social returns to the Irish taxpayer. That sounds quite noble, but that is ultimately what we're about. The taxpayer funds virtually every aspect of research in universities. Companies, when they're involved in large-scale research projects, typically fund of the order of 20% of the incremental cost of that project, but all the infrastructure, all the resources, all the teaching and the labs are funded by the state, and it's our obligation to ensure that the IP, the knowledge, the know-how doesn't languish and gets into the hands of entrepreneurs who know best how to exploit it. So at this stage I'm going to ask Paddy O'Boyle, our Business Development Manager for Software, to speak a little bit about some of the specific case studies that have been successful, and then we'll wrap it up. Paddy, I'm going to drop this particular slide in the interest of time, and I'll let you move on to, well, it doesn't follow very well.
So 2 DCU speakers for the price of 1. I call this our DCU Groupon offer. Until someone pointed out that the Groupon isn't a very well proven business model, so I'll just say we're trying to exceed expectations. So Richard gave a nice overview of the context. What I'm going to try and do here is focus on ICT, because that's what the area I'm centered on, and then give a little bit of sort of operational or tactical experience. I've been doing this for 3.5 years roughly, and I now have enough sort of experience of this to sort of recount some of the things, the learnings that I have, and hopefully it'll be helpful. So the very first thing is, if you were a company, and my focus is big and small companies, but really small Irish companies, if they were come to a university and talk ICT, my first thought was, well, where is the expertise? So I literally went through the websites and talked to people, and I came up with this slide, and I thought, holy moly, you know, that's not a good foundation for any kind of discussion. So my first challenge was actually to try and sort of better understand that. Now, it seems overly complex. The reality is, it was about half a morning's work to sort of decipher it, but I really couldn't go out to a company and say, hey, we're DCU, we've got ICT experience, how can I help you? So what I did was I translated it over into an inventory of, I think, 7 capabilities. So the reality is that that's an organic chart. I have different areas, and behind each of these areas is maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 very good researchers. So I can also tell you it's going to evolve. We have a cloud computing that will probably come in here, and we're also starting to get traction on what I call manufacturing and mechanical engineering. So it'll add. So if I do this presentation this time next year, it'll be a slight variation on a theme. So again, that's the first foundation for any discussion with any company, is what are the kinds of things that DCU is actually good at. And I think it's fundamentally important. I did the same job when I was working in the US for Bell Labs. And I just remember it. I went up to one very senior researcher and said, I'd like to inventory the capabilities you have. And he just said to me, hey, we don't do lists. Now, it just stuck out in my mind. The reality was I did exactly the same process in Bell Labs, but it was the foundation for all the discussions. So very quickly you can tell, is there any expertise within DCU? A quick discussion, and if there isn't, I'm more than happy to hand you over to somebody and say Trinity, who have maybe expertise that I don't have, through John or through Peter in UCD or any of the other colleges. So if you believe we have some expertise, how the hell do you get to talk to these people, right? So how do I market? This is the single biggest challenge in bringing technologies to market, is actually the whole promotion. I've just done a smattering of things that have worked for us. What you notice is it's a sort of an eclectic mix. I do not think there's a silver bullet after doing this for 3.5 years. It's a bit like your investments. You take a portfolio approach. I'll just pick out a couple just for illustration, just to see how crazy it is. Professor Alan Smeaton, who works as part of the Clarity Centre in DCU, did a program with James May. He's the guy from Top Gear. I think it was James May's Big Ideas. And just because of that program, a company who I'll profile later saw the technology. It had focused on what do you call it, photographic analysis for neurodegenerative diseases, but they thought of a nice marketing application. But you could never have predicted this. So literally what we do is we have a website, we have presentations over there, we go to events like this, we talk to people. The other thing I'd actually say is I thought I was going to be the centre of attention on a lot of this. All the leads would come through me. The practical reality is very senior academics like Barry, like Alan, like many of the main professors come with a huge network of their own. So the challenge for people like myself and Richard is actually to tap into that network, manage it and make it come through as commercial results. I took this chart directly from the DCU website. So if you're now convinced we have expertise and you now have a chance to talk, what are the mechanisms you could use as a small company to engage a university? I'm not going to go through all of this. I just put it up because just to show how diverse it is. So if you start at the top, you can sponsor a student. It's quite interesting. Sinead and Bulmers, they started off by just sponsoring a PhD student. I thought that's a very interesting starting point. I hadn't even thought of that. I don't put a lot of focus on it. We work through ERCSET. Down around the middle, you have bigger projects, and then as Richard said, towards the bottom you have the big CSETs. So again, the point of this slide is there's a huge number of mechanisms, and you don't have to be a multinational company to take advantage of them. In fact, the ones that I'm going to profile in the middle are deliberately targeted at small and medium-sized enterprises in Ireland. I'm going to pick two out of that middle if you had time to read the slide. The first is the Innovation Voucher, and the second is the Innovation Partnership. This is my slide on it. If you want to go to, I think, innovationvouchers.ie, you'll get all the details. But literally what it is if you're a business and you think you have a technology problem or a technology opportunity that you're overlooking, and you believe there's expertise in DCU or any college for that matter, all you have to do is fill in a form. Literally, I don't know what time it is. If it's 9:30 or 10 o'clock, this could be written in 1 hour. It could be written by noon. What you basically say is, hey, here's the problem that I think I have. Here's a researcher within the university system that you've met, you think could solve it. You fill in the form, and Enterprise Ireland provide €5,000 for the researcher to go off and try and solve that problem. So it's a program that I think is starting to get traction. It was much overlooked in the boom times. Now we're in more austere business times. I think more and more people are looking at it. It's open to abuse. What I'd say from a DCU and looking at ICT, what I try to do is, if there is a real problem, I try to build a relationship between the researcher and the company, and then hopefully it'll actually lead to something else. But again, all you have to do is fill in a form. You go through the process. You find you have a problem. You find a college you think could solve that problem. You fill in a form and you get it approved pretty quickly. There's a variant on that now. The one drawback is there's fixed costs for this. I think it's 3 or 4 times a year. The variant on a theme is called the Fast Track Innovation Voucher. It's like an innovation voucher with go faster stripes. Literally what it is you get your 5,000, but you match it with 5,000. But if you do that, if you apply on a Monday, you could be approved as quickly as a Tuesday, and you could start your project on a Wednesday or a Thursday. So well worth considering for people who haven't tried it before. Lots of good case studies and examples of where it works and where it doesn't work. The one that has worked best for me specifically in Dublin City University, and specifically in what I'd say ICT, which is sort of computer science or engineering, is the Innovation Partnership. So to me, it's just a really nice combination. To be successful, you need to have good technical expertise. You need to have a business or a market opportunity that's either unserved or poorly served, and then you need the funding. So you need, any successful business has to have these 3 elements, and the Innovation Partnership model captures that perfectly. This is my take on it. Again, there are lots of terms and conditions, and you work through it, and I'm sure somebody at Enterprise Ireland might claim that I'm sort of oversimplifying it, but again, you have a technology, potential market opportunity. The company is usually the world expert in where the market is. The research group or the researcher says, hey, I can actually solve that problem. And I've actually seen proposals like this sort of writing themselves in 1 or 2 1-hour meetings. And again, the point, and I talked it over with Barry this morning, is the actual application process, I'd say 90% of it's actually completed by the college. The company's involved in it for sure, they oversees it, they have to write the commercial stuff, but it's really not a very bureaucratic process or a very complex process at all. So to answer the questions on how does the funding work, so if you're a very early stage company, you can get 125,000 for a collaborative project with the university. You put 25,000 euros of cash up, and the state through the university pays the other 100,000. If you're a bigger company and you're what's called a high potential startup, and you're an EI client company, it can go up to 250,000. So 200,000 from the state through the college to do the work, and 50,000 from the company. Now there are terms and conditions, and there's different descriptions, and it's not always 80% funding. It really depends on the size of the company, but that's the rough guideline. So again, something that I think has worked incredibly well for DCU. I think I'm starting to get real traction in the market. We have a nice pipeline of activity at the moment, and we have a nice that we've just done, completed or in process, and then we have lots of cool stuff coming along. I have 5 case studies, and literally I had 3 of the case studies in talking at a Dublin innovation event for me yesterday. So it's really nice that these guys are quite happy to come in and talk about it. So I have 5 here. So again, it's going to be very broad overview and not very deep. I'm going to flick through this one really quickly because I now realise Barry's going to talk about his entrepreneurial experiences. But this is Jalico, a startup from DCU. They fix digital images, lots of chromatic aberrations and distortions in your images, and they actually fix it. But what it literally is 2 very bright PhD students who worked on the project for 3 or 4 years, and they're actually spinning a company out of it. There's not a lot of learnings here, and Barry's going to go in more detail. What I'd like to do is focus on a couple of other ones which are more on collaboration. The second one I'm going to talk about very briefly again is CITA Sports. Within DCU, we have the Clarity Centre puts together health and human performance experts with computer scientists. So one of the key people in DCU is Professor Niall Moyna. He's a conditioning coach for the Dublin football team. He worked with Dr. Mark Rowantree, and they developed a really nice tool that the Dublin football team used. And literally what it is, and I don't want to diminish it, but it's not rocket science. It basically means the Dublin football team online answer a series of questions after trainings or on a periodic mode of operation, and the information is aggregated, and then alarms are sent or information sent to Pat Gilroy, the manager. So instead of him having to manage 50 squad members on a daily basis, it's management by exception. And the comment from the Dublin team says that it completely transformed the communication between the management and the team. So with a very high profile team like that, and now a very high profile successful team like that, it made complete sense to try and take the same technology that worked for Dublin, probably worked for lots of teams. So we licensed the technology to a company called CITA Sports. It's backed by a guy called James Carroll, who's an astute technology investor. And one of the smartest things he did was he hired Matt Williams. Matt Williams is an ex-coach of Ulster, Leinster and Scotland. Very charismatic guy. Lots of network connections to different sports teams, and we're now taking this tool internationally. He's already signed up a number of professional teams in Australia. He's signing up rugby teams in France, and we're starting to make really good traction. But again, the emphasis is really novel technology within the university that, to be honest with you, I was more enamored by the more glamorous, more impressive stuff. Very good tool. The company saw it in a number of discussions on forums like this, and we got to a license very quickly. I'll do this case study, and I have a couple more that I'm going to gloss over. This is Spongeit, and that's the James May Big Ideas. The guys in DCU have very novel analysis techniques for digital images. So what Spongeit are, and I'll just go through it really quickly. Spongeit are a company where they call themselves an online digital marketing company. So, and I signed up for this. So you would get a questionnaire that you'd fill out on behalf of a brand, and in return for doing that, you get some points that then you use to buy things, or you get into a raffle to actually win things. So that's their core business at the moment. What they're now doing is they're moving away, and I think it's quite a breakthrough idea that what they're saying is they're now moving into your exposure to digital or to advertising on your daily life. And I can tell you that the process at the moment is incredibly unsophisticated. They work on a questionnaire. So you go out about your daily business, you come back in the evening and you'd answer a questionnaire and you'd answer when you were exposed to different adverts. Very unsophisticated. What these guys are going to do is you put a pair of glasses on and there's a camera built in, and as you walk around it takes photographs every 3, 5 or 10 seconds. And there'll be a huge number of images, and then using very sophisticated algorithms developed in DCU, again Spongeit didn't have this expertise, they analyse the images and they can now start to quantify your exposure to different advertising throughout your day. So it's an incredibly interesting idea. I remember reading a really big article, it was actually a financial analyst report on Google, and the sole underpinning of their astronomical valuation was how they were moving into online advertising and how easily quantified that was, and because of that it was going to take over the world. So these guys are taking the same level of, or not the same level, but very sophisticated quantification into an area that's traditionally very subjective and not sophisticated, and I think there's huge potential. I'll do 2 more really quickly just because the 3 up to now are completed. These 2 are in progress, but I got permission from the company just to talk about them very briefly. Mincon are an incredibly impressive company down in Shannon. They're the guys who built the drill bits that released the Chilean miners. When I was coming down, I was thinking Black & Decker, like a little drill, you go like that, or a variation of theme. These are big brutes of metal that just bang into a rock to actually bring stuff out. So I think 50 or 60 employees, very profitable company all over the world. In fact, I heard when I was talking to the CEO of the company, I think he was sending some guy to Libya or some North African country when I was doing it. So I remember him saying you have to do it, it's a requirement of the business. So they're all over the world, they're very successful, and what they came to DCU and said is, hey, we have a way of treating the surface of our drill bits that works well, but it's very expensive and it's very manual. Can you guys help? So without claiming any sophistication or understanding of the technology, if you treat it with a laser, you can actually have the same effect without all the cost. So the guys are just kicking off a collaborative project where hopefully we're going to use very smart DCU technology to make Mincon an even more successful company. And the final one, and I mention it because Michael from EIN brought this opportunity to DCU. Let me just describe it very briefly. Dan Ryan is, I called him a veterinarian, a specialist veterinarian, but he corrected me, he's a reproductive expert. So literally what he does is he goes out and ultrasounds cattle. And he's got a supercomputer between his ears, and he can look at an ultrasound image and actually detect the health, the sex, the age of the actual embryo. So that's really good. But if Dan wanted to grow his business, he'd have to hire 2 Dans to double it, 5 Dans to make it 5 times. So what he thought was, could he take the smart stuff that's inside his head, the algorithms that he works out, and put it into a computer system. So he worked with the image processing and analysis team within DCU, and we're about to kick off, or we just have kicked off an innovation partnership where the guys are trying to develop algorithms that Dan can actually, the images can be uploaded securely, analysed by the computer, and then like the Dublin football team, he can manage by exception. So instead of him looking over 500 healthy cattle and picking out the unhealthy ones, he can bypass the 480 because the computer has done that, and he can do the 20 problematic cases. So again, very strange business, a very eclectic mix of stuff we're talking about. It's amazing when you start to dig into just how huge the beef industry is and the cattle industry is. So even though it may seem sort of unglamorous compared to a lot of the computer vision and information analysis kinds of things, but that's an incredibly lucrative business. So I'm going to finish off with 2 silly slides. My wife says I have to be very careful because my sense of humour doesn't translate very well. But my life's ambition in this job is to take DCU technologies out to the market, make researchers who are incredibly bright work with companies who know the market inside out and see where the opportunities are. And it's the most stimulating, incredibly interesting business I've ever had. So working with companies helps universities, because we move away from the model where they just build it because they can build it. And then in return, I say, we'll actually help companies that pull this off despair.com. So hopefully we can actually break patterns that companies have. And again, the same applies to universities. So thank you very much for your time. A very broad overview.